Unaware I controlled the trust, my wife demanded her inheritance in front of all my name is Gerald. I am 57 years old, and I am going to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in my late father-in-law's dining room when my wife stood up from the table and demanded money from a man she did not realize was me. Not literally me. She could see me clearly. I was sitting 3 chairs to her left. What she did not know was that the entity she was demanding money from, the trustee responsible for distributing her father's estate, was a role I had held quietly for 4 years, and that the decision she was publicly insisting be overturned was mine. I will explain how this happened, because it requires explanation. My father-in-law's name was Ernest. He was a man of considered habits and very few words, which made him difficult to know and, once you knew him, difficult not to respect. He had built a modest manufacturing business over 30 years, sold it at the right moment, and spent the last decade of his life managing what that sale had produced with the same careful attention he had given the business itself. Ernest had 3 children. My wife, Diane, was the middle child. Her older brother was named Franklin, and her younger sister was named Carol. The 3 of them had the specific dynamic of siblings who had grown up with a father who expressed love through provision rather than warmth, grateful for what they had been given, uncertain of where they stood with each other, and prone to the particular competition that emerges in families where approval was always finite. I had been married to Diane for 19 years when Ernest died. I had known him for 22. In the early years of my relationship with Diane, Ernest and I had circled each other with the mutual wariness of men who are not sure yet what the other one is. Over time, that wariness had softened into something I would not call closeness, but would call respect. He trusted my judgment on financial matters. We had several long conversations over the years about the business, about investing, about the structure he was building for his estate. About 4 years before he died, Ernest called me. Not Diane. Me, he said he wanted to talk about the trust. He had established a revocable living trust some years earlier, the kind of structure that is common enough among people of his means and generation. He had an attorney who managed the documentation. What he did not have, he told me, was someone he trusted to serve as trustee after he was gone, someone who would administer the distributions with discipline and fairness and would not be moved by pressure or sentiment into decisions that violated the terms he had carefully laid out. He said he had watched me for 20 years, and he believed I was that person. I was quiet for a moment on the phone when he said that. Then I asked him if he had spoken to Diane about this. He said he had not. He said the trustee's identity was not required to be disclosed to the beneficiaries in advance, and that he preferred to structure it so the trust administration would be handled by someone the beneficiaries could not lobby before the fact. He said that if Diane or Franklin or Carol knew I was going to be the trustee, they would spend years working on me at family dinners, and he did not want his estate to be decided at family dinners. I understood what he meant. I had attended enough of those dinners. He said he would have his attorney draw up the documentation. He said my name would be on the trust instrument, but not in a way that was publicly advertised. He said I could decline if I felt the position would compromise my marriage or my relationship with the family. I thought about it seriously. For several weeks I thought about it. In the end, I accepted. I did not tell Diane. This is the decision I have examined most carefully in the years since, and I want to be honest about my reasoning. Ernest had asked me not to disclose it for the reasons he described. I believed his reasoning was sound. I also believed, if I am being fully truthful, that telling Diane would have created a dynamic that would have made the eventual administration of the trust nearly impossible. Diane is a person of strong feelings, and she would have felt, consciously or not, that my role as trustee was something she could influence. that it was an extension of our marriage into her father's affairs. Ernest had specifically chosen someone he felt could not be influenced, and telling Diane would have undermined the very quality he was relying on. So I kept it to myself. Ernest died 2 years later after a brief illness. He was 78. The service was attended by everyone who had known him, which was a large number of people because Ernest had been, in his quiet way, significant to many lives. After the service, the family entered what I can only describe as the standard difficult period that follows the death of a patriarch. Grief, yes, but also the specific anxiety that arrives when the person who held a family's financial center is no longer there, and the question of what comes next becomes suddenly pressing in ways that feel indecent to acknowledge, but are impossible to ignore. Ernest's attorney, a man named Hollister, contacted me in my capacity as trustee approximately 3 weeks after the death. We had several conversations about the trust instrument, the assets, the distribution schedule, and the conditions Ernest had attached to certain provisions. The conditions are important to this story. Ernest had not left his estate in simple equal thirds. He had structured the distributions with specific conditions and timelines, the details of which I am not going to fully reproduce here, because they involve family matters that are not mine to publicize entirely. What I will say is that certain distributions were conditioned on specific circumstances. Certain funds were held in a supplemental trust with defined release criteria, and one particular provision involved a sum that would not be distributed until a defined condition had either been met or had definitively failed to materialize. Diane's portion of the estate was not the simplest portion to administer. The months following Ernest's death were tense in the family, in ways I had anticipated, and some ways I had not. Franklin, who had a business that was underperforming, was anxious about timing. Carol, who had always felt that Ernest had never fully seen her, was reading everything about her portion with the close attention of someone searching for evidence of a preference she suspected had always existed. And Diane, who had a specific expectation about a specific sum that she had discussed with her father directly in the last year of his life, was discovering that the timeline for that sum was not what she had believed it to be. I administered the trust through Hollister. My name was on the documentation that went to the beneficiaries through counsel. But the communications were formal and legal and conducted at a remove, and in the first several months it did not become a dinner table conversation in any direct sense. That changed at Thanksgiving. Ernest's house had passed to Franklin by specific bequest. Franklin's wife, Patricia, had hosted Thanksgiving in that house for the first time since the death, which was its own complicated thing. The table was full. Franklin and Patricia, their 2 adult children, Carol and her husband, Diane, and I, and Hollister's paralegal who was attending in a peripheral family friend capacity that Ernest had established years ago. Dinner was tense in the specific way of family dinners, where money is an unspoken presence at the table. Diane had been building towards something for weeks. I had seen it. The way she had been talking about her father's estate with a sharpening focus. The way she had been parsing the trust communications with an attorney friend she had consulted informally. The way she had been constructing a case in her mind that the trustee, whose identity she did not know, had made a decision that was inconsistent with what her father had told her directly. After the main course, before dessert, Diane put her fork down. She addressed the table. She said she wanted to speak about the trust. She said she believed the trustee had made an incorrect determination regarding the timing and conditions of a specific distribution. She said her father had told her personally that this money would be available to her within the first year of the estate settlement. She said the trustee's interpretation of the conditional language was narrow and wrong, and that she intended to challenge it formally, but she wanted the family to know where she stood. Franklin looked at his plate. Carol looked at Diane with the expression of a person who is privately relieved the attention has gone elsewhere. Patricia refilled her water glass. Diane said that whoever the trustee was, they were clearly someone who did not know her father's actual intentions. That they were administering the letter of the document rather than its spirit. That Ernest had meant for his children to be supported, not managed. She said this with considerable force. She said it to the table, to the family, to the room. And then she looked at me. Because I am her husband, and I was 3 chairs to her left, and the natural place for her eyes to go when she was making a case was to the person she expected to be in her corner. I looked back at her. There was a moment. I want to be precise about what happened in that moment, because it was not long, but it was dense. I saw her look at me. I saw the expectation in her eyes that I would nod, that I would signal agreement, that I would be the husband who was with her on this. And I sat with the weight of knowing what she did not know, which was that the trustee she was characterizing as someone who had not understood her father was the man she had been married to for 19 years, and that the determination she was calling incorrect was one I had made after many hours of reading Ernest's precise and carefully chosen language in the context of everything I knew about what he had actually intended. I said, "Quietly, Diane." She looked at me. Something in my voice made her pause. I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you say anything else." The table went still. I told her. Not everything, not in detail, not in a way that turned a family dinner into a legal proceeding. But I told her that Ernest had named me trustee, that I had accepted 4 years ago, that I had administered the estate in accordance with the trust instrument and in accordance with what I believed Ernest had intended based on my years of conversations with him, that the determination she was challenging was mine. The table stayed still. Diane looked at me for a long time. Franklin slowly set down his wine glass. Diane said very quietly, "You knew." "This whole time?" I said yes. She said, "You sat across from me every time I talked about the trustee being wrong. You sat across from me and said nothing." I said I was bound by Ernest's instruction not to disclose, and I believed, and still believe, that the determination was correct. She said, "You believed." I said, "He was very specific in that language, Diane. I can show you the conversations I had with him. He knew what he was writing." The dinner did not recover from that moment. It was not a shouting match. Diane is not a person who shouts. It was something quieter and harder than shouting, the specific silence of a person recalibrating everything they thought they understood about a situation. We drove home without speaking. The following week, Diane had a formal conversation with Hollister and reviewed the full trust instrument with her own attorney. Her attorney agreed with the determination. The conditional language was clear. Ernest had written it with the precision of a man who had done business for 30 years and did not use words carelessly. Diane did not challenge it further. What followed was not a quick recovery. Diane and I had serious conversations in the months after Thanksgiving about disclosure, about trust, about whether I should have told her sooner and what it meant that I had not. I told her everything Ernest had said when he called me. I told her his reasoning. I told her that I had believed he was right, and that telling her would have compromised exactly what he was relying on me for. She did not entirely disagree. What she said, after a long time of sitting with it, was that she wished she had not made that speech at the table, that she had felt very certain and very wronged, and had made her case to the whole family without knowing who she was making it to. That the moment of realizing mid-argument that the person across from you is the person you are arguing against is a particular kind of disorientation she had not expected to feel inside her own marriage. I said I was sorry I had not found a way to tell her before it became that. She said she understood why I hadn't. We are still married. We have been married for 23 years now. Ernest's trust has been fully administered and closed. The distribution Diane had contested was eventually released when the defined condition was met, about 14 months after the dinner, which was within the range Ernest's document had contemplated. I think about Ernest sometimes. About the phone call. About why he chose me. I think he chose me because he knew I would sit at a Thanksgiving table with his daughter, making a public case against my own determination, and I would not say a word until the right moment. He knew I would carry it correctly, even when carrying it was uncomfortable. I believe he was right to trust that about me. Though, I will say this, if he had any idea how that particular Sunday afternoon was going to unfold, and knowing Ernest, it is entirely possible that he did, he might have mentioned it when he called. It would have been useful information.